Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss Boris Johnson's prospects of remaining Prime Minister up until the next election, at least as it might be, that Rishi Sunak has now run out of road with his latest failure to manage the economy. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, I said a month or so ago, I couldn't quite see how Rishi Sunak is still the favourite to replace Boris Johnson, if and when he falls. See, you could see it for a while. He was popular, but he was popular because of the furlough scheme. But that ended. And if he was going to replace Johnson, he needed to do so before the reality of his economic ideology became apparent. Now Rishi Sunak, he is the wealthiest MP to have ever existed in this country. No MP has had his level of wealth, ever. Seriously loaded. He makes Jacob Rees-Mogg look like a street urchin. I've seen a few people say that Sunak cannot possibly manage the economy. He's just too rich to understand the impact of his policies on ordinary people. Now, I don't automatically accept that, but it is clear that he doesn't really have the experience to understand things. But where you have a gap in your experience, you can have intelligent people, wise people who will listen very carefully to advice from those who do know, but it is clear that Sunak has not. His statement earlier this week was so bad that even the right-wing press couldn't praise it. I mean, the likes of the Express and the Mail, they exist purely for trying to persuade the workers of Britain that Tory policies are somehow good for them. That is their entire reason for being. That they could not big up the announcement of the previous day told you how detached from reality it was. But then another thought occurred. What if the headlines were as much to bash Sunak as the fact that they couldn't find anything to crow about? After all, Sunak is seen as Johnson's main rival. Surely he can't be now, but he was. Now, for those who cannot work out how Boris Johnson is still in charge, particularly after this week, you look at the situation this week, whilst Rishi Sunak is trying to show sympathy, pretend to show sympathy anyway, for Ukrainians being bombed, Boris Johnson, whilst human tragedy is being discussed, was laughing and pulling faces at the opposition benches. In a meeting yesterday with NATO leaders, all we could see on the footage was Joe Biden giving Johnson a telling off and everyone else giving him the cold shoulder. No one else would even talk to him. He was just stood around flapping around like an idiot. How is he still in charge? After all the scandals, after everything, how are people not seeing he's just so unfit for government? It's largely down to the fact that ultimately the people don't get to decide for another couple of years. It's down to Conservative MPs, and Conservative MPs cannot think of any replacement who would be as effective a campaigner in a general election. They know that Johnson is wrecking our credibility on the world stage. They know it. Yeah, some of them will look in dismay at that spectacle at the NATO meeting yesterday. But they know he is an amoral lawbreaker. They know he's a serial liar. They also know he's a traitor to his own nation. Now, despite what you may think about Conservative principles, they might not be happy, some of these MPs, but they ignore all of it in return for power, because that's their guiding principle, power. If there were a clearly credible successor waiting in the wings, Johnson would have been gone by now. The by-election loss in North Shropshire last December would have sealed his fate. But he's still here. And he might now still be in place come the election. Up until now, I wouldn't have really thought that credible. As mad as it sounds to me, he might actually still be in place. Because Rishi Sunak was the most popular MP on the front bench of either side. He still technically is. That popularity has been sinking like a stone recently as the benefits of furlough have subsided and lower living standards have come in its wake. And without the pandemic, this would have happened much sooner. Because remember, we may not know, his first act as Chancellor was to tell government departments to start working on austerity cuts again. Then COVID, and he had to put those plans on hold. He thinks he can win support by piling on the tax burden now and dropping income tax by a penny just before the election, which is now surely going to be in 2024. I do not know if it'll work for the party, because voters do seem to keep falling for it. They dropped taxes a bit and loosened the purse strings just before the election. They promised that the good times are coming. Yeah, you had your hard times, good times coming now. Yes, we can now promise there won't be any further tax increases. It's all looking really good. Next Parliament, no tax increases. The spending will keep coming. Then they win the election. They wait a year. Then they whack the taxes back up, drop the spending down, and the whole hideous cycle keeps playing out in the same way because people have really short-term memories. But that move will not help Sunak personally because this fiddle relies on economic pain for another 2 years. And he's going to be blamed for that pain. He's the Chancellor. He's not going to be enjoying his popularity rating for very much longer, I feel. And I am a fool every time I try and believe in certain political realities because the last few years has completely broken the political model in the UK. But it does not seem remotely credible that Sunak can now be seen as a successor for Johnson. Sunak needed to not be Chancellor when his economic policies were laid bare. His time has surely now passed. Tory MPs can't possibly believe that he can win back the trust of the Red Wall voters. The mess he made of a radio interview in particular yesterday, but there were other television interviews and they were all disasters, but it was something to behold. He was talking about the fact that everyone in his household has their own bread. Now, I get, yes, he's incredibly wealthy. His wife even more so. Of course they're going to do things differently. But the way the likes of Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage succeed in conning ordinary people is by trying to pretend that they're one of them. They're not one of them, but they fool people somehow. But when you've just delivered a statement that means financial pain and millions more being plunged into poverty, you do not talk about your own domestic situation in terms of living standards that ordinary workers simply don't identify with. It seems likely that Sunak gained support in the party because he became popular during the pandemic. But like I say, that popularity was down to furlough. The furlough scheme was a plan drawn up by officials before he even became Chancellor. All he did was give the go-ahead for it. What we're seeing now is what Sunak is like when facing pressure from journalists about his own policies. He was evasive, he was even aggressive at times. Someone who thought he might be a good option are now seeing that under pressure he folds like a knackered deck chair. Sunak has surely blown any chance he had of persuading colleagues that he could win over the sort of voters that the Conservatives need to fool again at the next election that currently Boris Johnson looks like he's, shat the bed with. So Johnson's basically seen off a major rival for his crown. He is, according to a report I read, inviting all Tory MPs to a posh dinner in order to get them back on side after Partygate. Obviously, Partygate is not over. It's merely in hibernation. And I said recently that although it's always been clear that the Met Police are doing Johnson a political favour with their non-investigation of it, the people who leaked the stories in the first place will have more to come. That we haven't seen anything new for a while is because they are waiting for the most opportune time. Every leak we've had so far has coincided with a bit of vulnerability on the part of Boris Johnson. Mark my words, there will be more. Of course there will be more. And it would not surprise me if we see the most explosive leaks in 2 years' time if Boris Johnson is still in charge. Imagine the situation. 2 years' time, we're just over a month out from the election. Too late for the Tories to change the leader then. And they can't delay the election any longer. It has to happen May 2024. Then a load of photos is leaked of Johnson partying whilst people remember the loved ones they lost without ever getting to say goodbye to them. Now, I can't be 100% certain that this will happen. But I think any Tory MP who does not have this at the front of their mind as being something that could easily happen and derail the whole campaign must be even thicker than I give them credit for. Because I do not know why they would risk such an outcome. They could easily find themselves in 2 years' time still behind in the polls with credible opposition leaders coordinating their efforts to flip as many Tory seats as possible, a leader who has lost the trust of the very people they don't believe alternatives like Sunak, Truss or Hunt could ever win over, and they would go into such a campaign knowing that at any moment, once they were committed, someone could leak a load of very damaging proof of Johnson's contempt for his own public. Utter madness. But then again, this is the Brexit Party wing of the Conservative Party. They are mad. But the calculation on the part of Tory MPs remains the same. Do they think a replacement has a better chance of winning the next election than Boris Johnson? And this is where Johnson has a massive advantage, because he convinced a lot of people that he has some sort of magical touch when it comes to reaching out to voters. He doesn't. He's just a buffoon that followed advice from political strategists. It was a con. It's a trick. He's an actor. But they're unlikely to have as easy a job advising him in future because he has shattered the trust of the public. But if enough Tory MPs don't see that Boris Johnson is just the product of a lot of strategic advice over the years, they look at him having this je ne sais quoi about him. And they look at the alternatives and they conclude that the alternatives cannot build bridges to ordinary voters, and that Johnson, as unpopular as he is now, he might turn on the magic come the election. Then at that point, you start thinking that maybe they will just stick with him out of desperation. So then the question comes, so what do I think of that as an anti-Tory Labour supporter? I mean, I think it dooms us to 2 more years of shameful government, but I don't really believe that that would fundamentally change with any of the generally accepted alternatives. I think there may be a small number of Tory MPs who might be better, but I don't think they could win a leadership contest. And I certainly don't believe that they would try and reverse any part of Brexit. So it's really about the election in 2 years' time. Will Labour and the Lib Dems be happy to take on Johnson? I think they will. I think they would have preferred Rishi Sunak. Again, that's another thing that got me wondering, why on earth did they make Rishi Sunak favourite? Because I think Labour would have absolutely loved Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. I think they could have beaten him very easily. With Johnson, it's still not bad. There'll always be another scandal to highlight his unsuitability for office, and with continued support, they will also be able to point out the rest of the Conservative Party and say, all of those Tory MPs allowed it. There was 5 or 6 that publicly spoke out against him. The vast majority, over 300 of them, all allowed it. They allowed his law breaking, they allowed his treason, they allowed this buffoonery. Speaking of which, I wonder what the next scandal to rock his public image will be. I mean, he has broken his own laws, like I say. He's lied to his queen. He's betrayed his own country. I mean, where do you go from there? But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.